Howdy, this is James Tanner, and this is episode number 3 of the Exploring Genealogy series. In this episode, I will be discussing the Brigham Young University Family History Technology Lab app called Relative Finder. This app has turned out to be very popular, especially for finding relatives in various types of gatherings. So let's get right into the exploration of this interesting app. Well, the first step, of course, is to navigate to the BYU Family History Technology Lab. I think the easiest way to find it is to type in BYU Family History Technology Lab into a Google search and take you right there. As you can see from the sidebar on the left, there are lots of programs that have been developed, some of which are games and entertainment. Others are ways of visualizing the family tree on Familysearch.org, and others are simply informational or research oriented. Relative Finder falls into the research category, and if we click on the link here, it'll take us right to the Go to Relative Finder portion of the program. And the first thing we need to do, of course, is to log in with Familysearch. If you don't have a free Familysearch account, you can register for Familysearch and create a free account right here on the line. And all I have to do is sign in. The program is then connected, and it downloads my tree. This may take a few minutes, like 2 seconds here in Provo with Google Fiber. And it begins to calculate some relatives. On this case, I show 50 of 679 relatives using 4,432 ancestors and 16 generations. And I get all sorts of list of relatives here. There isn't really anything here that I could not find if I was searching diligently on the family tree. What is interesting, however, is that I see here that I have a connection to on the family tree to Miles Standish, who was a Mayflower passenger. This turns out to be pretty interesting. So if I click on that, it shows my relationship to Miles Standish, and it goes back through a considerably long line of people to the Stewarts and the Huntingtons and Israel Standish, and who married Simon Huntington, who married Amy Standish, and Israel Standish, and Josiah, and then Miles Standish. I really, before I got into Relative Finder, hadn't explored this particular relationship. I already knew that I had my Mayflower ancestors, and they were verified. But this is another kind of link that you probably would enjoy investigating if you discover something like that. All sorts of people on here. Most of them are my relatives that I'm acquainted with, but over on the left-hand side we have quite a long list of people that of different types of people that we could use as to determine whether or not I'm a member or not. So if I click on the Tanner family, for example, which is mine, it shows just those that are in the Tanner family. One interesting relative that comes up in this program is the fact that I am related to my wife. And this is my mother-in-law, Beverly Lucille Glade, and who is now deceased. But right now, that was a surprise to both me and my wife that we were researching lines that went back and crossed over. Kind of confirms a lot of things about family history research. One of the findings of a large recent study done by MyHeritage.com was that even in our modern age, most of the people in the European world are marrying their relatives, even if they are quite distant. You can create private groups here. Here's another group that is people in my neighborhood. And we found a couple of people that I work with at the Family History Library on this particular list, and a few other people that were quite a bit of a surprise. I don't recognize too many names, but it was interesting to see how I could have been related to all of these different people. Now, these are public lists down here on the left-hand side. Always interested to know if you're related to any authors and poets. And if I click on, I have to click off on Oak Hills and then come back to authors and poets. I am a fourth cousin, 4-time removed, with Louisa May Alcott, Sinclair Lewis, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Ralph Waldo Emerson. I didn't know that I enjoyed reading some of my relatives' writings. I wasn't aware that I was reading writing of those that I was actually related to. Stephen Covey, interesting, lived just across the way from where our house is here in Provo. William Shakespeare, I'm sure that would probably need to be very much investigated before we discovered that one. Ambrose Bierce, I used to read his writings when I was younger. Enjoy the poets like Longfellow and a few people like that. Emily Dickinson, one of my favorite authors, Henry David Thoreau. So there's a long list here. It's always interesting to find out. You may want to investigate if you really are serious about determining whether these people are related to you. You want to see how they're related and see whether that's an even believable kind of connection. So here with Thoreau, for example, looks pretty complicated here. And it goes back to John Cook and Sarah Warren and Richard Church and Elizabeth Warren and a bunch of people back there. But interestingly enough, this connection back to Richard Warren has been documented quite heavily. And if there is a connection documented to Thoreau, I certainly am related to him. So I'm not doubting this would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It wouldn't be difficult from using the New England Historic Genealogical Society records that have now been put online for the Mayflower Society to determine if this information is correct, because they have 5 generations down from each of these people, and particularly I happen to know that that's the case with Richard Warren. So surprisingly, I probably am related to Henry David Thoreau. So this is there's always something interesting here on Relative Finder that you discover. Can go on here with composers, turn off the authors. I guess my family hasn't turned out to be overly musical, considering that some of the people on this list aren't particularly melodic composers, such as John Cage, but that was interesting. But I can move on to this. Constitution signers. Well, it looks like I've got a fairly high percentage of all of the constitutional signers. Interestingly enough, the ones that I'm most familiar with are not on this list, but that's just the way sometimes it is. Let's do a couple of more of these investigations. Entertainers, that's always interesting. Related to Andy Williams and Patsy Cline. And I bet one of my secretaries that I had years ago would be impressed to find out that I was actually related to Elvis Presley. That was her favorite in the whole world. And she was just devastated when he died. Anyway, there's lots of people here on the list of famous people. Stevie Nicks, coming from Phoenix person. Donny Osmond, all sorts of Marie Osmond. I didn't know I was related to the Osmonds. Well, we'll see if I actually am someday. Now I'm going to skip European royalty. That doesn't impress me much at all, but there's lots of different people. BYU people. Once again, Stephen Covey shows up. But George Romney shows up, and as a matter of fact, my wife is also related to George Romney, so we probably have more connections than we imagine. A lot of famous people on here from the BYU standpoint. Some of them I'd be interested to see. Rex Lee. That's interesting because both Rex Lee and my father came from the same small town in Arizona. They were very well acquainted. So there's lots of people here. I would kind of question some of those connections. The Mayflower. Now this is interesting because previous to this, I really had only thought that we were descendants of 2 or 3 of the Mayflower passengers, and it looks like I may be related to a whole slug of them. And it would be interesting. Oh, these are people that are related to the Mayflower, so we have to take those off. Ha, that sells that. Okay, there's not quite that many. And so we have Miles Standish, John Cook, Francis Richard Warren, John Tilley, and Peter Brown. I didn't know all those. So we'll have to investigate those connections and see how we are connected, if I am. Now, in this, we have to always remember that the family search, family tree, is a kind of a work in progress, and that some of these older connections may not be supported by any sources and not be able to be verified. Now we'll skip down here. Science and technology, related to, got to take off the old ones if we want to see the new ones. There's some kind of famous people in here. Have to investigate some of these connections. And we can't forget sports figures. Lots of people here. Billy Casper. My father had a lot of different kinds of interesting friends, and one of them was Billy Casper, and I got to meet him at the Phoenix Open golf tournament one time. That's about my closest connection to anybody that was famous in sports. I haven't really had much of a contact with sports people before in my life, but it's interesting to find out. I'm afraid to click on this one with U.S. presidents because there's a few of them that aren't my favorites, but there's lots of ways here that we can determine how you are related, and you can create a group and join a group or manage a group. When you're at a gathering of some kind, you can, if you get some people to get on the program and sign in, then as a group, then it will tell you who within the group that's signed in is related to you. And then you can connect with people nearby through your phone app, through a smartphone app, and you can connect with a friend and with a deceased person. Not how they're going to work their app, but I guess you could put them in and see if you were related through the family tree. That'd probably be the only way that would happen. Let's see how that works. Yeah, you need a number out of the family tree before that will work for you. Kind of suspect that there's not too many. Well, we don't know. Maybe there are smartphones when you die, but I would kind of doubt it. And more settings, set the program up. This is pretty straightforward and simple program. There's a few options in it. You can have a remain report table or a path report table that shows you a path back to that person. And then you can also show the direct ancestors and not the ones that may be imaginary. In this case, I've got a couple of kings in here that I would kind of seriously doubt that I'm related to those royalty. Those are mostly not very reliable pedigrees. Well, that's kind of the overview of Relative Finder, and I hope that you enjoy using this program. It's given me a few surprises, and I will be looking at it a little more carefully, and perhaps I will end up being related to some of these people listed. Thanks for watching.